At this point, I'm nearly ready to start pouring the first cast out of the mold. I'd like to point up a couple of things before we start. The first thing, one of the most important things when I prep my silicone molds, I like to douse the inside of the mold with baby powder. Ordinary, everyday baby powder, also known as talcum powder. What this does, this relieves the surface tension. It releases surface tension on the interior of the mold. A lot of people who make molds, they go ahead and they start pouring their resin in, and you don't really need a separator. A separator is not really required with a silicone mold. However, you do need something to break the surface tension. Now, surface tension occurs when the liquid urethane plastic makes contact with the interior edges of the mold and traps air on the inside. Baby powder lines the mold. Okay? It allows the resin to flow freely, even getting down into the tips of these tines. Without it, you will find that you will have air pockets at the tips of the tines. You will be missing tips of the tines. I'm going to show how to powder the mold. This is simply a hair color dispenser that you can get from any beauty supply store. It's used for applying hair dye in specific places or hair color or highlights. I get mine from Sally's Beauty Supply locally. What I like about it, it's a squeeze type bottle, and this little nozzle allows you to get in close and push powder into the mold. Okay? Not only will it relieve surface tension in your mold, it'll impart a nice aroma in your shop. Okay? The other thing that I do before I will pour silicone into a mold like this, as you recall, the mold was sliced open to be able to remove or extricate the antlers from the mold, the original antlers. Now, after the mold is powdered, I'm going to seal that incision. It's a temporary seal. It's a very light seal. There's no glue made that can glue silicone together. There is one product that can secure silicone to itself, and that is silicone. Now, in this case, what I've got here, I've got a tube of silicone caulking, and this silicone caulking, if used, would need to set overnight. Okay? I'm going to mix up small amounts of the silicone that the mold was made with, and that of course will be the Platsil FS20. I'm going to mix up small amounts of this, and I'm going to apply it along the seam with a small spatula, a small stainless steel spatula. And this will, I will allow this to set. Once this sets, it's just going to be a fine film of silicone. Once it sets, the seam, the incision, will be closed and will be sealed. If you don't do anything to seal it, you're going to have leakage all over. And I'd rather not waste my urethane casting resin. Now, let me give a little explanation about the products that I use. Over the years, I've created a lot of miniature sculptures and molds of those sculptures. And I've created castings of my sculptures to reproduce them. Over the years, through experience, I have come to discover a little thing that I call cross-product contamination. Now, what does this do? Well, if you're using a good platinum silicone, like those from Polytech, like what I choose to use, using a lesser brand of urethane casting resin will eventually destroy the mold of a good silicone. In the past, I have used the Polytech platinum silicone to make flat open molds. And what has happened with those molds, we were pouring into them smooth on casting resin, smooth on 100 casting resin, basic casting resin. It's a good casting resin if you're using a lesser brand of silicone mold. What was happening, our molds were not even lasting a year. And we were getting very few pulls, very few castings from them before the surface of the mold began to deteriorate. Scratched my head and wondered what the hell was going on. So I asked my distributor down in Texas if he ever heard of such a thing, and he had heard complaints like this before. And he couldn't understand what it was. And then he did a little bit of research, and I did a little bit of research. And come to find out that the smooth-on plastics are a little harsher, not quite as refined as those produced by the Polytech company. So when I use Polytech silicones, I will use Polytech plastics. Now theirs is Easy Flow 60. They have several different brands. They're a few dollars more than the less expensive, than the more inexpensive smooth-on. But I'm looking for longer lasting results. I'm not looking for immediate satisfaction. I want my molds to last longer. I want the plastic. I want a better grade of plastic that will not degrade in sunlight or weaken over time. The Polytech Easy Flow plastics answer all those questions for me. They do all that I want them to do without destroying the molds. Now, what other proof do I have of this? I've made molds with the Polytech 7325 Platinum Cure silicone, the same type of open face molds, and we started using the Easy Flow 60 in the molds. I have molds now that have been around over 3.5, going on closer to 4 years on some of them, and there is no degradation of the mold. The surfaces are still flexible, still fresh. There is something to this cross-product contamination theory that I've come up with. That's why, yeah, I pay a little more for the Polytech silicones. I pay a little more for the Polytech resins. But tell you the truth, I'd rather do that than have to make this mold over again. Believe me, anyone who's watched this video knows rightly what was involved in making this mold. I do not want to do that again. Not with this set of antlers. A different set of antlers, sure, I'll make another mold. I will use the same silicones again. But cross-product contamination is not going to happen for me anymore. I'm going to stick with one brand. This is the brand I choose. You can use whatever you want. I'm just telling you simple facts that I have learned through years of actual product use. And I'm sharing that with you so you can avoid the same mistakes I made. Lecture over. Let's begin. First thing is to pull the mold off the upright support. And turn it right side up again. Next thing to do, we carefully pull the silicone mold out of the support jacket, and I want to open up the incision that was made in the mold. Now I'm going to take my powder in my little dispensing bottle here, And I'm simply going to shoot the powder up into the mold. See if I can get a better view here of this. There's no need to remove the entire support cradle for this step. In fact, it will help keep the mold secure if it's kept in place. Now I want to open this up so the camera can catch what I'm doing. Opening up the mold, taking my little dispenser that has got the baby powder in it, I'm going to give a couple of shots up into the tines, or the sockets, the openings for the tines. Now I'm going to pat the outside of the mold and distribute the powder so that it gets all the way down into the tip of the interior of the tine mold. And I'm going to add a little, shoot a little around, like so. And again, I'm going to tap it so it gets all the way down into the recesses of the mold. Now, using a bamboo skewer or a wire probe, just be careful you don't poke a hole, I want to go in. Well, let's start with the tip tine first. Make sure this is all the way down to the tip. Now, this is the side of the antlers that has that big defect in it, and you can see that right there. So I need to kind of move this out of the way. Looks like I might need to get a little more powder down into this tine. There we go. Tap it down. Make sure it's distributed all the way to the tip. Same thing with the first tine here. Let's get a little more powder to the interior of the mold. Get in here with the skewer, bamboo skewer, all the way down to the very tip. Tippy tip tip. The nice thing about it is the flexibility can take a curved tine and you can straighten out the mold so you can get a straight stick or wire or metal probe down into the tine. Now that that's done, grab all the tines together and I simply jiggle the entire thing. I jiggle the powder back out of the tines. Tap them back out of the tines. You can see the powder falling out here. Okay. Now I'm going to take an inexpensive brush. I'm going to get in here. I'm going to brush around the interior of the mold and get the powder everywhere. I want to be sure I have full and thorough coverage. Full and thorough coverage all around. Oh, it smells much nicer down here now with the baby powder than it did when I was building this Bondo glass support jacket. I sure can tell you that. Another way you can check on your progress of the powder in the mold is with a flashlight. If there are any places that the powder hasn't reached, the light will reveal it. And I can see right at the tip on this one here, I need to get in there a little more and manipulate the powder around up into, this is a tough tine to reach, but just like so. I'm going to get in there, straighten out the mold so that the tine is straight. There we go. You can actually push against, gently push against the tip of the mold until you see it stretch, indicating that the tool is down at the tip. Now again, I'm going to bop this around, knock this out. And a lot of times as the powder comes out, it will also coat the interior of the mold. This is good. This is coming along real nice. Now to get the brow tine, same thing. I'm going to go in. I'm going to shoot some powder. Manipulate this around so I can get where I have to be. I'm going to get some powder in the mold. Now turn it over and try it this way. Oops, there we go. I think that's going to work. Yeah. Much better. Much better. Now I can reach the brow tine. Give a little stretch to the mold. Get this up into the brow tine where it needs to be. Let me find it first. There we go. And give a couple of squeezes of powder. Get the powder in there. Again, knock it about. Make sure there's plenty of powder in there. Take a look in. Give a little more powder to the inside of the mold down here. Brush it around. Just like so. Now I also want to get powder down into the first tine, the large main tine here. So the powder that's inside the mold right now is being knocked forward down into this tine with a little more added from the squeeze bottle. A little bit of, well, not really looking to tamp it down. I'm not tamping it down. That's not what I'm doing. Not tamping it down as much as I'm making sure it's well distributed down into the tine. Okay, now let's knock the powder out of here. It falls down into the, this is what was up in the tine, right here, this amount of powder right here. And I'm going to take this, distribute it with the brush. You want to get all areas of the mold interior with the brush. All areas. Okay. And I'm going to repeat all this entire process on the other side. After I turn it over, oh, and you can see the powder has already reached through this area here. Okay, down at the base of the first antler we're working on. So I'm just simply going to make sure that that gets all around the burr, like so. Okay, I'm going to pop a little more powder up into the antler opening. It's a lot easier when you're not trying to show what you're doing on camera. And then I'm just going to go all around the interior of the mold like so. Now this simply requires brushing it over the entire surface. Remember, this is being done to alleviate or relieve or eliminate surface tension in the mold. Okay. Now, go like so. We'll get this all the way down the mold. If you want to skip this step, skip this step, but you will have a lot of surface air bubbles to contend with, or a lot of air bubbles on the surface of your mold to contend with, and they will have to be filled before you can finish. Now, you don't really need a separator. Silicone is not going to stick to anything that goes in it. And it really won't stick to the powder if any powder was left in, but you don't want to leave powder in the mold. You don't want to leave powder in the mold because you don't want it on the surface of your casting. And you certainly want to get it out of the deep details such as around the burrs of the antlers. That's why I use my compressor and I'm going to blow the excess powder out. Now I've got my compressor hooked up. And I've got about 40 psi of air going through the air nozzle. And it's enough to blow the excess powder out of the tines. Like I say, you can use your compressor with an air nozzle. You can use canned air, you know, the canned air that you use for dusting and whatnot, dust removal. Doesn't much matter. Simply blows the powder away and gives you a chance to set it up for the next step. And here's the setup for the silicone. I'm going to use what I have left of the Platzel FS20, the A and B part. I'm going to use a little, what is this, 1 ounce plastic mixing cups to stir the silicone up with. For my dispensing purposes, I'm going to use these syringes. Now these are 1cc syringes I purchased from an eBay seller or Amazon, I forget exactly where. They have no needles, but these are terrific for drawing ingredients up into the syringe. You're getting exact measurement, and then dispensing just as much as you want, just a little bit, equal amounts into a cup. And of course the little smaller craft sticks to stir up this silicone. Normally this is weighed out, but I'm going to try measuring it out, you know, by centimeters and milliliters and whatnot. I'm not going to try and weigh this on the scale. I'm using such a small amount to seal the mold. We'll see how it goes. And just to make it easier on myself, I've marked the sleeve for each, A and B, and I marked a little A on the syringe barrel where there's no measures, and B where there are no measures. I've also marked A and B on the top of the plunger on the syringes. And because there is so little in the bottom of the jars, and I cannot reach down in here with the syringe without making a mess, I'm simply going to pour out a little bit into each one of these little plastic cups, one marked A, one marked B, and I'll draw the silicone out from the little cups instead of the little plastic jars. And I'm only going to draw out 0.3 milliliters of A and B and put them into a separate cup for mixing. I'll mix it with a stick. Like so. I don't know how well this is going to act. Hopefully it will set. I think such a small amount, the weight might not be critical. It's just A and B combined. But we shall see what we shall see. I'm only going to do small sections at a time. If this does set in the time frame that it's supposed to set, I'll be very, very happy. Now I'm going to add 1 drop of Tin Thicks. Just a drop to thicken this up, just a touch. I don't want it flowing all over the place. I know you see it's no longer liquid. Now I'm going to apply this to the seam. Now, like I said, I'm going to apply this to the seam. Hopefully it's going to set. If not, I'll just have to wipe it off and do it, measure it, or do something else. Now here's the seam. I'm going to put together the seam up to maybe just past the point of that little dimple in the antler. So let me get the silicone on a tool here. And now I'm going to apply it ever so lightly to just the inside of the incision. Mostly toward the outside of the cut. I don't want to get silicone on the inside. I don't want the incision. I don't want the seam to show is what I guess I'm saying. Now I'm going to smear it on the outside here to join it together. And I'm going to take the antler mold, put it back in the cradle in its proper place, and adjust by feel, adjust the silicone mold where it's supposed to be so that it's snug tight in the mother mold. Now I have to turn this over and get to it, so I'm going to do this off camera. Both tips have been sealed, for about an inch, inch and a half length. I'm going to grab a cup of coffee, and when I'm done, I'll come back, and if the measuring worked the way I'm hoping it did, it should be sealed. It should be closed off. We'll see how it goes. Alrighty, it's been a little while, and the way you can check if your silicone set, you get the cup that it was mixed in. Don't throw it away. Keep it on the side. And you can tell, if you go into the cup with the stick, if it pulls up like this, that means it's cured. Okay? Well, let's see how the tip of the mold set at the incision. I'm going to start by, to put as less stress on the area that was just resealed, I'm going to remove the other tines first before I pull this out. Now, I want to see. Yeah, the incision has been closed. I hope the camera can catch this. But the incision has been closed. Yeah. Now this will be readily opened when I go to pull the cast out. This can be actually pulled apart to remove it. Or if I need to, I can just go over very lightly with a knife and reopen that. I'm going to check the tip on the other side as well. And again, I'm going to pull these out of their respective holders, and I'm going to gently pull this out and back. Let me check this side here. Very nice. Okay, this idea worked fairly well. Yeah, because this went down to here. This went down, almost down to the front. Okay, I'm going to apply more of the silicone to the rest of the incision on this one side, and I'm going to lock it back into the mother mold. Okay, I've gone all the way back to about this point here, and I've put a real good layer on that, and I'm going to let it set, and we'll see how it goes after she sets. After this end sets, I'll pull it again, and I will close up the seam from where it left off to approximately, I would say, to here. That's going to be where the gravity is going to pull the resin down the most. Up here, not so much, and I can actually coat. I can actually rotate this and coat it with the resin as it's poured. So I'm not real too concerned about the seam up at the top here. It's really held tight because it's the mold itself is very, very thick at this point, as you can see. So I have another stretch of repair done. You may have seen that the end was a little on the weak side. I reinforced it again as well, just in case. But this is where we're at with the mold right now. When that side's done, I'll get to this side and seam up the other side here as well. I will, before I finish this side off, this will give this side more extra time to set, and I will go after sealing up the opposite side right there. So that's where we're at. That's where we're at. Okay, the last bit of silicone gluing really didn't take in a lot of spots. So what I did was I removed what was there. It was such a thin layer. In fact, it was kind of too thin. I lined the mold back into the cradle and made a few drill holes where the seam is located. After that was done, I got in there with a fresh mix of silicone to seal these areas. Just these two right now. This needs to be extended a little further down. Okay. This needs to be extended a little further down. And this one here, I need to find out where exactly the seam is before I drill. These little access ports will allow me to make sure that the mold is lined up correctly. And that's more important than anything else. It'll also afford me a place to get in and apply some silicone. And this time I actually used my favorite little modeling tool. This little fella right here. Alright? I was able to get right in and model around where I wanted the silicone to be applied. I'm going to let this set. I'm going to let this set overnight. And tomorrow I'll continue to drill out the hole. And we're going to do the same thing on the other side, but I'm going to show it on camera, what I've done. Okay, I've covered the silicone mold of the antler silicone mold. I've covered it with a plastic bag, only because I'm too lazy to take the whole thing apart. I'd really rather not. I'm just going to go ahead and extend the access ports. By the way, the first two that I sealed with the silicone were very successful. This is a really large drill bit. I'm not sure of the size exactly, but it's a biggie. And this is just, the bag is just going to protect the silicone from the... I'm going to go through these next two areas here that I want to seal. You want to make sure they're in the correct place for access to the seam, and I've already double checked it. Now there's one more here. Then I need to use the shop vac and clean up this mess. Alright, now let's get this crap all cleaned up, and then I'm ready to do the other side. Now that messy project is done, I've got the access ports all the way down on this side of the support cradle, as well as the opposite side of the support cradle. I'd like to point something out. The way this works is quite simple. When the silicone antler mold is secured back into the support cradle, the seams of the mold can be adjusted and lined up to assure that they close. Okay? And this can be done all the way down the entire length of the silicone mold Make sure that the edges are tight against each other. That is then followed by the application of fresh silicone onto the mold through each of these portal openings. Okay, that's redundant, portal openings. Through each of these access ports. Okay, that will allow the silicone to set up, which after that's all set and dried, you can then pull the antler molds out of the support cradle. You can then apply fresh silicone to the additional areas of the seam. You can then reinstall the silicone mold into the support cradle, and you'll have accurate alignment of the seams. That will allow the remainder of the silicone to set and prepare the mold for pouring the casting resin into the mold. So, with the little access ports done, the next step will be to finish securing the seams with silicone, setting that aside to dry. I have a fresh batch of resin coming from Texas, Richardson, Texas, from Brick in the Yard. Once that's here, I will be casting a set of antlers. Okay, I have about 0.8 cc's of silicone mixed. I'm not adding any thickener this time. No thickener will be added. I just want this to flow onto the seam. No need for thickener. It's going to be very, very thin layers in each place. Put my little stick down. I'm going to grab my modeling tool. And here we go. Put a little bit on the end of the modeling tool and just apply it down onto the mold like so. Very gently. I do not want to disturb the seam. I want to coat it. I don't want to disturb it. Just let it drip on. Kind of pick it up like you're picking up something with a spoon and let it fall off the spoon end of the modeling tool. I'm going to go down to the next one, and the next one, and the next one. Repeat the process for each exposed seam. And this should set up in about 10-15 minutes down here. It's about 62 to 65 degrees down here in the basement shop, and it should be a little longer than just the 8 minutes for it to set up. I'm just going to go along and put it all in place. See, I'm putting it on heavy, but then I'm thinning it with the tool as I go along. In other words, I'm spreading it with the tool. And this part of the mold here is very, very thick. And I'm going to continue on with the rest of it on both sides. And when next we see it, it'll be ready for casting. Okay, I've already gone ahead and closed up the remaining seams on the mold. And I'm just going to demonstrate real quick what I did. I pulled a section out of the mold, found where I had an opening, mixed up a small amount of the Platsil FS20, added 1 drop of Tin Thicks thickening agent, and what I did was I went over to the area to be repaired, applied a little bit of the silicone, applied it very thick to one little area of the seam, reinserted the silicone mold back into the fiberglass cradle, and let it set. Now I did this all the way down the line, all around the antlers. the antler mold, I should say. This mold is now ready and prepped for casting. That's the next step. For this project, I'll be using Polytech's Easy Flow 60 liquid plastic. It's a urethane plastic. This quart kit sells for about $44 for the quart kit. Now, instead of simply mixing up the resin and coming up with a white colored cast, I'm going to add a drop or two of the brown polycolor, okay, to the part B, the clear part. I'm not going to add a lot. I don't want a dark brown set of antlers, but I do want to impart a tan, light brown or tan or light tan color to the plastic. This way, during the finishing process, I have a nice base to start my color with, and if the antlers ever get scratched or bunked or rubbed, and the paint does rub off or get scratched off, beneath it will not be white resin. Beneath it will be a tinted tan resin. Much more natural for an antler. If you wash antlers, thoroughly wash antlers, they will never come up pure white, but they will come up much, much lighter in color. And when you recolor faded antlers, you're starting with a light brown color. That's what I plan to do here, is have a light brown color to start. All right, as can be seen here, you have some of the tips of the silicone mold for tines will release from the tip of the cradle, support cradle. So, in order to keep that from happening during the casting process, I simply go around with a piece of masking tape and help to hold it in place. Now, the mold at the tips was nice and thick, if you remember, when it was being made, so holding it in place is not going to be too difficult. Just got to make sure you have a decent masking tape that will hold it in place. This is repeated on all the tines, especially at the tips, where there would be a tendency for them to fall away from the support jacket. And if you possibly can, avoid buying cheap shit masking tape like I did this weekend. Get yourself the good 3M, the good Scotch brand 3M masking tape. Now, you don't want to make it too tight. You don't want to crush the mold, but you want it to be held in place enough. Now, over here, I'm just going to put it on the tip. Then I'll put it around the other tines and a little bit around the main beams as well. And around this last spot here. The reason for taping this in place will become apparent during the casting, as the mold needs to be tilted to and fro, side to side, to ensure that the casting resin completely coats the inside of the mold. And this will just help ensure that the mold does not shift in the support cradle and that it holds in position. The last thing you want to do is have any of these tines dropping out, or any of the main beams of the antlers dropping out of the support cradle. Another thing I'm prepping for the casting, I have this heavy gauge aluminum armature wire, and I have bent it to fit in the mold, at least to get into the main beam, even part way. This will probably be inserted after the resin has been poured in. Of course, it's not going to go all the way down. I don't expect it to, because of the tight twist and whatnot of the main beam. But if I can get it in far enough that it will at least give some internal structure support to the main beam, there will be less chance of it possibly snapping during the unmolding process, which I seriously doubt is going to happen. but you never know. It's better to be safe than it is to be sorry. So, not having molded and cast antlers before, I'm going to go with safety and not worry about breakage. And as can be seen now, there will be one piece of wire for each side. And I'll just cut it with this heavy bolt cutter. Even though it's aluminum wire, it's a heavy gauge. And the bolt cutters make it a lot easier to cut it down to size. Easiest way to get the shape you want is to use the outside of the mold as a guide. It will only go down just so far because there's a tight turn and there's no way to get the wire into the tight turn. But then we just simply install it like so and work it in, and it will go in just so far and no farther. And there we go. And those, like I say, those will be installed into the main beams after each side is poured. And it will be poured one side at a time. The center, the skull plate, will be poured last. Alright, I'm going to go ahead and put a couple of drops of the brown polycolor directly into the resin. This will become a dedicated resin kit specifically for casting antlers. Now, I spoke with the owner of Brick in the Yard Supply, and we discussed it. He suggested using 4 drops. I'm going to start with 2, do a small test, see how that cures, and if need be, I can go to 4. I just shook this up a little bit. 1, 2. Alright, what makes this tough is the plastic has created a static charge, and the drips have collected on the inside of the neck of the bottle. So I'm going to close it well. I'm going to tip it. Now you can shake this up to distribute the color. The only thing you have to do is, before you use it, you must let it settle. Okay? You don't want to create undue air bubbles in the resin. Well, that's pretty brown right there. That's really brown. Now, I'm not shaking so much as well, I guess it is shaking, but it's more going end over end, really. And I want to get all of that dripped onto the neck and upper part of the bottle. I want to get that distributed. Now, you can see bubbles rising in the product here. Let me see if I can make them show up a little bit. You see bubbles rising to the surface. Now, all those bubbles have to set before the casting is made in the antler mold. However, I will make a small test casting in a little plastic cup just to see what my dried color will be. Okay, I've done 2 tests. The first test was with 2 drops of the polycolor brown, the brown polycolor, into the resin. And as you can see, what I got here was more of a off-white, not quite dark enough. I then added 2 more drops, this time using a syringe to put the color into the resin. I got better shaped drops, and I was able to put the tip of the syringe closer in past the neck where the static charge was formed, and it sort of grabbed the resin. Here I've got a more brown tinge, still on the very, very light side. So I'm going to add 2 more drops of the colorant into the resin. I simply draw it up into the syringe, put it off to the side, open the bottle, and be sure I get in close to the bottle. What I mean by getting in close to the bottle is I get down past the neck, 1, 2 drops of the colorant, immediately put the lid on, put the rest of the brown colorant back into the color bottle, cover the color bottle, I'll wipe this off the fingertips of my gloves. Now I can distribute this by giving it a good shake. This is very, very strong colorant. And I'll make another test. Now I can tell by how much is drawn up in the syringe, the color is going to perform a lot better. Now there is 0.6 cc's of each part A and part B, that have been put into this little cup, and I'm thoroughly stirring them up. And I will put this in a warmer room so that it will set quicker. But here's the color I have at this point. Sort of a color of maple syrup, I dare say. Let's get this in closer. Get a focus. It's about the color of maple syrup. And this will be, I think this, when this cures, this will cure to the shade of brown I'm looking for. Fingers crossed, gang. All right, I added 5 more drops to the bottle using the syringe. The third test casting was darker, but still a little bit on the light side. Just a little too light. So I'm going for broke. I added, like I say, 5 more drops. We'll see how this cures. I may not get this cast until tomorrow. All right, gang, here we are. These are the tests to date. This was the first test right here. That was 2 drops of the brown polycolor into the part A of the Easy Flow 60. This was 2 more drops used with a syringe. This was another 2 additional drops dispensed from a syringe. And the last but not least, this is the color that I got from dispensing 5 additional drops. So total we have 2, 4, 6, 11 drops. Now I'm thinking I may go with another 2 or 3, but this is mighty close to what I want. Remember, I'm not looking to make the color of the antlers. I'm looking to create a good base for the antlers, a base color for the antlers. And I do believe this is a good base color. I've held it up to my antlers. The only shade missing would be, as far as a base color, would be yellow. A drop of yellow. Now I have yellow, but it's smooth on product. It's not Polytech, and I'm not going to use it because of the cross product contamination I spoke of earlier. But this right here, this is a nice shade of brown for the base color of the antlers. It's a far cry from the nearly white color that was first produced. And of course, both of them are a far cry from pure white resin. This was the first color. This is the last shade right here. Quite a difference. Quite a difference. I'm very happy with this. This will go into the antler mold for sure. Now that the proper ratio of the brown polycolor to the part B of the Easy Flow 60 liquid plastic resin has been determined, I wrote it out on the label. Antler base, 11 drops, brown polycolor. When this is gone, I'll order another set. I'll order it by the quart because I believe a quart's enough to do 2 antlers. And I have an older set, an older kit, uncolored. It'll be white, and that will be used for the skull plate. We are ready to proceed.